Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop with Sue. Today, I am here with Joan Melendez Misner, and I want to just start with her introduction, but I know I'm going to get this wrong because I can barely pronounce all the words. So you're going to correct me if I say anything wrong. Joan Melendez Misner is a mission integration systems engineer. Already that is like a mouthful. And you work at NASA for the Launch Services Program, working on management of space and aeronautical flight systems for all non-crewed and scientific missions. How did I do?
You did awesome. I think you nailed it.
Thank you. Okay, so now you're also a first generation college graduate, and that gives you this real incentive to go out there and represent the underrepresented communities. You encourage them to pursue education in STEM. And you also, I love this, you are out there inspiring young individuals, especially young women, to get excited about STEM careers. So, I mean, we're just thrilled to have you here today because it's a different perspective and it's really exciting. I think everyone wants to being able to introduce a relative as a rocket scientist. We joke about it all the time, and you are one. So thanks for being here with us. And I want to start with, I know I gave the mouthful, but tell us, what do you actually do at NASA?
So I am the interface between the spacecraft and the launch vehicle or the rocket. So I want to put it in like the simplest terms possible. So when you're building a house, you want everything to your specs. You want a pool at a certain place. You want a kitchen that's designed to you. You can think of the homeowner as the spacecraft, and then I am your builder. I am making sure that the requirements are in place, that everything works properly, and that once that house is built, it's built to your specs. So that's what I specifically do as an integration engineer on the rocket side. Is we want to make sure that that spacecraft survives the launch. So we write these requirements and we do these verifications and tests to ensure that it survives.
Okay, so how'd you get there? Like, what background do you need to be able to do what you do today?
It's I have a very non-traditional path. So I first started off wanting to become a doctor. I really love the aspect of helping people and being a people person. But I volunteered at a hospital, saw a whole bunch of blood and needles, passed out on the floor, hit my head, and that's when I was like, okay, I need a course correct to something else. And so, I started off with being really in love with science and math, and having that background as a doctor. Wanting to go into that career, you need that background. I just continued with it, and I had amazing guidance counselors along the way who were like, hey, have you ever thought of being an engineer? Have you ever thought about being a scientist? You get to do real life problems and solve it real time, and that really interested me. So I did a lot of internships throughout college, and I tried to really find what interested me specifically, and I landed on the chemistry side of things, which is a little ironic because it's not really what I do now as an integration engineer. But that's a really cool thing about NASA is you don't need a specific degree or background to work at NASA. What I do, I work with physicists, I work with chemists, I work with engineers. They all have the same role as me, and we all have different backgrounds. And that's the wonderful thing about working with a great place like NASA that encourages people who love science and space, and then putting all together.
It's very cool. I'm looking at you now and I'm thinking to myself, there had to have been hurdles along the way. So, as a woman of color, like when you look back on it, number one, what were the hurdles? And number two, how did you get over them?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody in life has hurdles at some point. I mean, no one has a perfect, absolutely perfect life. And I'm actually really proud of the hurdles that came along the way. I had a lot of rejection. I had failure. I failed several classes throughout my college career and in high school and before. And I thought that I wasn't going to be good enough to be a rocket scientist because in my mind, I always envisioned a rocket scientist as, 4.0 student, sharpshooter, top of the class. And, whenever I failed a class in college, I was really down. I had that imposter syndrome kind of sneak in and say, you're not good enough to get to where you are. But I think that built my character, being able to fail and get myself back up. And I believe that it really opened my eyes to what STEM is. STEM is, you don't necessarily have to be inherently good at math or science to really love STEM. You can, be curious and want to learn something new, but as long as you keep going and have that perseverance in you, that is what makes a STEM individual successful. And so for me, like I mentioned, I failed several classes. That imposter syndrome always creeped in. So how I got over a lot of that stuff is For the imposter syndrome side, I started something that I call a brag sheet, which I have right next to me in my notebook. And so the brag sheet is every time I had an accomplishment or every time I overcame a hurdle, I wrote it down. And something as simple as, passed my organic chemistry class to, got a job at NASA. I write those things down because whenever I have any of this imposter syndrome of thinking that I'm not good enough, I read those, accomplishments that I have. And I see all of the difficulties that I face to get to where I am, and it really puts things into perspective.
So I want to take you back to those, we all kind of sanitize our life experiences. And you say, I failed a bunch of classes and I had imposter syndrome. But for that kid going through it right now, can you kind of go back to like, how was there despair? Did you worry how you were going to get out of this? Was it embarrassing? Like what did it feel like at the time?
Yeah, I cried a lot. I was depressed, like everything, and that's what I love to do outreach and doing stuff like this because I want to share the successes. Hey, I'm a NASA engineer, but I also want to show the humanizing side of STEM. Like you don't necessarily have to be a robot and be that 4.0 student. I talk about my failures and I talk about there are nights where I would stay up all night thinking that I'm not going to get to where I am because I failed this one class. I cried. I had all different kinds of emotions. I went through the roller coaster itself. And so it's really important to talk about these failures and my emotions at that time and say that it's okay. It gets better because at the end of the day, you picking yourself back up and getting to learn from your mistakes and moving forward is building your character. One of my very all-time favorite quotes is failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of every success story. And I usually say that a lot because it's inherently true. We fail, we're human, we're not perfect, but as long as you can pick yourself back up, you're allowed to have those emotions. You can cry, you can scream, you can get angry, you can be embarrassed, but as long as you pick yourself back up, try it again and keep on going. That's the way that I feel is someone to be very successful in whatever they want to do.
I feel like you're actually even giving kids a formula today, like cry, do whatever you need to do,
Do all of that.
and then get back up. That's the success part of that story. So I think for you to get out here and be so honest about it is so encouraging and so helpful. We know that you're very passionate about helping young women, particularly encouraging them to pursue careers in STEM. How do you do that?
Oh, wow. So a lot of outreach. So one of my favorite things about NASA is not only do we send rockets into space, but we also do a lot of outreach. We want to make sure that people know, about these launches that we're doing, the science behind it, get to know the rocket science behind the curtain. We don't want people to be like, oh, it's just the Wizard of Oz. Like we want people to put a face to this profession and being able to really have that representation, especially as a young woman of color, being able to see someone like myself do outreach like this or go to schools and say, wow, there's a rocket scientist that looks exactly like me. That's extremely powerful. And that's something that we always want to make sure that we put out there is just the outreach aspect of NASA, which a lot of people don't know. And I hope that, events like this will be able to keep continuing to do.
All right. So in my looking around about you and what you do and how you help people, I also saw that it seems like maybe you want to be an astronaut one day.
Let me see. There's so much space stuff behind me that I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. But yeah, absolutely I do. It's a complete dream of mine. I actually applied to the astronaut application 2 years ago. Anybody can apply to be an astronaut. Obviously, there's qualifications. You just go to USA Jobs, and at this point, I think you needed a master's degree instead of just the bachelor's in STEM. So yeah, I'm going to keep on applying, and hopefully one day I'll be able to see our beautiful blue planet up from the different angle.
Well, we can't, I'm certain you will, based on your history and your tenacity. And I can't wait to see you when that happens. It's really exciting.
I'll wave.
Okay, so teen years are often difficult. Actually, I would say often, probably as always, because it's when young girls face especially strong pressure to kind of act like a girl, whatever that looks like. So did you feel that growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think teenage years are one of the hardest years for anybody. At that point, you're trying to figure out who you are, what you want to be, what you like, and then you have also the societal pressures, like you mentioned, is is this girly enough, or is this something that will make me, somebody look at me differently? It's extremely difficult. So I definitely went through that phase. I was in the band, so I played the clarinet. So I was a very nerdy kid. So yeah, I definitely had pressure to, try to fit in, but at the same time, I didn't want to let go of the things that I was passionate about. So at the time, I really loved playing my clarinet, and I also liked being in science clubs and physics and chemistry, and I still enjoyed that, while being able to go out with friends and enjoy life as well. So when I usually tell teenagers, because I get this question a lot, is figure out who you want to be, and then everything else is sort of secondary. And so I kept going with my band. I even went through college and I was a clarinet player in the college that I went to. And, I kept that part of me because it's something that I love. So always pursue what you love and what interests you.
That is great advice. Now, we're talking to parents of teenagers. Maybe you have a good example of this in your own home. How do we support our kids who are going down this path? And maybe we're starting to notice like that there's a little pulling back from being really like smart, academic, doing well in math, kind of those things that we typically see happening to girls as they're entering into adolescence.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a young age, I was really interested in the stars and space. And my mom at the time, she just had a high school education. And so, bless her heart, she saw that I was very interested in this STEM and this space, and the asking a lot of questions on why are stars bright? How far away are stars from Earth? And so, my mom, what she did is she bought a telescope at a very young age. And then we would sit outside and we'd stare at the stars. And even though she didn't have the background of, the space and the STEM side, she would research on her own and just kind of inherently come up with questions and then engage me and engage my curiosity. And I think that was really important to me because it showed that, it wasn't like a homework assignment. I wasn't being tested. I wasn't being quizzed. It was more of a conversation. It was me asking questions and her coming up with the answers, about like how far away a star is. And so it was something that we inherently did together. It stayed up until our teenage years, when I started to kind of push away a little bit. And so what my mom would do is, she would take me to science museums whenever we were off and we were together, on the weekends. And she'd be like, hey, this weekend we're going to go on to a science museum because there's an astronaut that's talking, or hey, they're doing a space theme event at this museum. Let's go to it. So she knew that I was pulling away, but she didn't, she kept on trying to encourage me to get that side of me and still, have that curiosity build inside of me. So it was really nice for her to keep doing it. And I encourage parents to, be respectful, understand that teenage years are really difficult. They will pull away, but, trying to incorporate STEM into their lives, because STEM is everywhere, from the food that you eat to the weather outside. We just launched Goes Tea on Tuesday, and they're going to be giving us good weather data. So everything that we do in our lives, there's some kind of a STEM element. And so being able to incorporate that into their already difficult teenage years, I think is a really good bridge that we can do to move forward and to continue and encourage young girls to be interested in STEM.
I mean, so much of your story is a mom who championed your interest.
Yeah, absolutely. My mom, like I said, she was great. She, at some point, she didn't know the answers to the questions that I had, because I would, as a kid, I would be like, how do astronauts shower? Or how do they eat? Like, how do they get, stuff like that, she would research the science stuff, but something silly like that, she really wouldn't know. But yeah, I think it's great because it showed interest in what I was doing. And so that's what I love about my story, is just my mom championed my path. And the reason I am where I am today is because she kept that curiosity. She found ways to encourage my curiosity, encourage me to ask questions, whether it was buying me a telescope or, having a coding kit available for me for Christmas, and, incorporating something that I loved at the time. So at the time, I really like Harry Potter. And so there's coding kits out there where you can incorporate what you like. For me, it was Harry Potter. I had a wand that I could code into a system, and, it just worked really well. And again, it showed my interest, and then also just have that STEM element as well. And it just combined it really well.
So the telescope sounds like a great place to start. Are there any other things you would recommend parents who are listening now and saying, I want to be that champion, just like Joan's mom was, but I don't know where to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Really good way is get involved with your local, there's science clubs, there's space clubs. I'm very lucky myself because I grew up in Orlando. So I had the Space Coast right in my fingertips. And then I had the Orlando Science Museum. So, being able to incorporate museum trips or being able to incorporate some STEM elements. So there's a lot of toys out there that will have that, for example, that I did was that Harry Potter, that mesh of what I like, and then that STEM element and combining it together. There's Doctor Who ones, there's Star Wars. There's just so many different toys out there that I think is a really good way to continue. Also role models, being able to utilize the network of people in your community. So in Central Florida, we do a lot of STEM outreach. Being able to talk to these students, being able to see themselves in us, I think is an excellent way. So encouraging to go to these seminars, to go to these outreach events so they can see themselves in these individuals and ask those questions, ask about their their past, present, and future, what they want to do. Being able to stay that involved, I think, is a really good way. And again, just being, letting them figure out who they are, because again, it's a very difficult time for teenage girls. So don't try to push it on them because they will just immediately shut down and say, nope, I'm not going to do this. But, being able to ask questions of events that are happening in the world, again, we launched GOES-T, which is a weather satellite on Tuesday. And so, what I usually tell students in Florida is weather is really important because of hurricanes. We deal with this all the time. So, we need to launch satellites in order to get that data for you to be safe. And so being able to incorporate life events with these STEM elements is a really good way to move forward with it.
Okay. And Christina says Girl Scouts.
Yes, I was a Girl Scout. I was a Girl Scout when I was younger. I had the badge. I recently talked to, I have a pen pal in London, and she's a young girl. She's, I think, like 8. And she found, one of these outreach events that I did, and her mom reached out. And I love to do outreach events. And she was about ready to get a badge. And so, I kind of sent a video of encouragement saying, hey, I was a Girl Scout too. And, having that encouragement from somebody else is really important as well. Girl Scouts, clubs, anything that you can get a hold in.
Thanks, Christina. I don't think I would have thought of Girl Scouts. So thanks for bringing that up. So you do a lot of outreach, and I'm wondering, what are the common questions that you get from the students who are listening to your presentations?
Oh, I get, so we do outreach in elementary, middle school, and high school. So you definitely see the differences, from elementary of like, hey, can you eat the ice cream in space? Or how do you shower in space to, more path questions. More recently, I did an outreach about 2 weeks ago to middle school, and there was about 150 students, and 40% of them were women, which is fantastic. And they had amazing questions. One really stood out was, her uncle was helping her restore a car. So she was really interested in mechanical engineering. And so he took that and ran with it and said, hey, I have a car that I'm going to be fixing. Come with me so I can show you how an engine works and how does this, different elements work. And she asked me that, she's learning this on a more, macro level. Like, how is that going to correlate for her getting a job at NASA or being a rocket scientist? And I was like, that's an amazing question, first of all. But second of all, the concepts you learn at that age is going to translate to working on rocket engines. It's just a little bit bigger. The overall concept of it is what you learn, but then you can translate that to jet engines. You can translate that to rocket engines. So, it was a really interesting question because, again, a lot of these women seek and want to learn more about the path and try out, the knowledge that they're learning now, whether it's, working with your uncle or going to science fairs and stuff, like how can that translate to a career at NASA? And so being able to showcase the different avenues that you can do to work at NASA is a really encouraging way for these young girls to keep going.
Okay. So first of all, I just want to say, I have seen a rocket launch, and all I think all the time is, how does that work? And you actually know. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's really neat. Being able to, as a young kid, again, I watch rocket launches in my backyard with the space shuttle. Space shuttle is one of my favorites just because I grew up with it. But being able to now know the science and understand the analysis that goes behind the very end and all the work that leads up to that rocket launch is so interesting. And again, I love talking about that because we only get to see the tip of that iceberg, the launch itself. But then all that work underneath, the analysis and all the testing that we do, a lot of people don't know about. So being able to showcase that and show, the science and math that's needed to get something like that to space, to get a rover to Mars, is extremely interesting and important.
Let's move a little bit outside of the science of it and the STEM of it, and just talk a little bit about, you mentioned you would have imposter syndrome. Now, as an adult, you're doing a lot of public speaking. Do you ever are there nerves? Like, is there ever a time where you're like, I don't know how I'm going to get this right?
I'm nervous right now. I mean, we all get nervous because we're human. That's just an inherent feature of who we are. I always get nervous when I'm going to speak in front of crowds. But what I usually do is, I think back of when I was younger, and whenever I saw someone, a NASA astronaut or a NASA engineer, or just someone in a field that I wanted to be, come to my school, the excitement that I had questions already prepared for these speakers. So, I take myself out of that zone and try to envision myself as how I was when I was younger. And then my comms and my nerves go a little bit low, because again, I'm just there to help. They're there to ask questions, and I'm just there to be a representation of who they can be if they continue on this path.
Okay, first of all, there's no indication that you have nerves. So that's amazing. And you have a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for this. So it spreads. It just sounds so exciting. Can you just like stand up a little bit so everyone can see your cool uniform? Because I want to say, even if for nothing else, how cool is it that you get to wear that if you work at NASA?
I mean, so anybody could technically get this. I know this was one of my favorite jackets because when NASA launched Doug and Bob, which was the astronauts that launched for Demo 1, and from American soil for the very first time in several years, this is the jacket that they use for the broadcast, and I just completely fell in love with it, and now it's a staple in my wardrobe.
Very cool. Joan Melendez Misner, thank you for making time to talk to us. And all of us, we want to hear when you become an astronaut.
I will definitely maybe come on here and be like, hey, I finally made it. That'd be kind of cool. So
the invitation is there. Thank you.
No, I want to thank you for doing this, because again, doing shows like this, showing outreach, being able to show that women can do anything and everything is extremely important. So thank you for everything that you do.